Some mysteries chill us because they're famous. The Zodiac Killer, Amelia Earhart, Jack the Ripper. But then there are the ones almost no one talks about. Cases buried in dusty files, whispered about in small towns, and left to rot in the shadows. And yet, sometimes those are the scariest of all. Imagine a case so strange, so bone-chilling, that even the investigators who worked it decades ago still admit, we can't explain what happened. A trail of bizarre events, eerie coincidences, and evidence that seems to vanish the deeper you dig. This isn't a ghost story. This is an urban legend. This is real. And for reasons nobody can fully explain, it's been kept out of the spotlight until now. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Case File. Every mystery begins with a file. But this one, it didn't sit on the desk of a famous detective or spark a front-page headline. Instead, it gathered dust in a back room, buried under stacks of routine reports. For decades, it was almost as if no one wanted to talk about it. That's what makes this story so haunting. Because the truth is, people did know something was wrong. A handful of officers in the small department knew this wasn't just another missing person. Locals whispered that something far darker was unfolding. But as weeks turned into months, the case faded. No resolution. No body. No clear suspect. Just silence. And here's the thing that chills investigators to this day. Why did this case never make national news? Other disappearances from that same era did. But not this one. Was it incompetence? A deliberate cover-up? Or maybe something so bizarre that authorities didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane? When you think about it, it's almost as if this mystery was never supposed to be solved. As if the deeper you look, the more it pushes back, resisting every attempt to uncover its truth. But that resistance? It only makes the story more terrifying. Because now, decades later, we're opening that forgotten file, and the secrets inside are unlike anything you've heard before. Chapter 2. A Town on Edge. Picture a small town where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where the biggest headline is usually about a high school football game or a church fundraiser. That's what made this disappearance so disruptive. It wasn't just the loss of one person, it was the way it cracked the sense of safety that held the community together. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked started double-bolting them. Parents who used to let their kids ride bikes until sunset now called them inside before dinner. And late at night, whispers spread through diners and gas stations. What if it happens again? You could feel the unease in the air. Streets that once felt familiar suddenly looked threatening after dark. Even the woods at the edge of town, usually a peaceful backdrop, took on an eerie weight. Some locals swore they heard strange sounds echoing from those trees. Others claimed they saw lights flickering in the distance, as if someone or something was watching. But here's where things get even stranger. Law enforcement didn't exactly ease people's minds. Their updates were vague, their press conferences short, almost as if they were withholding something. Instead of calming the town, it only fueled speculation. And so, the town began to fracture. Friends turned suspicious of one another, rumors took on a life of their own, and fear became the new normal. But fear has a way of sharpening memories. And soon, locals started remembering details they'd overlooked before, details that might change everything. Chapter 3. The Last Sighting. Every mystery has a moment where everything feels frozen in time, the last confirmed sighting. For this case, it came on an ordinary evening that turned out to be anything but. Witnesses recall seeing the victim walking along a quiet stretch of road just outside town. It was dusk, the sun dipping low, casting that golden haze that makes everything look both beautiful and a little eerie. Some said she looked distracted, as if deep in thought. Others claimed she wasn't alone, that a dark vehicle slowed beside her. But here's the chilling part. No one could agree on the details. One person insisted it was a pickup truck. Another swore it was a black sedan. And when investigators pressed further, those stories began to blur, overlap, and contradict. It was as if memory itself was playing tricks. Still, the timing mattered. That was the last moment anyone could place her with certainty. No security cameras. No cell phone pings. Just fleeting human recollections that grew less reliable with every retelling. And yet, even in those hazy accounts, patterns began to emerge. Strange headlights on the same road. Footsteps echoing in the woods. The feeling of being watched. The more people remembered, the more unsettling the picture became. This wasn't just a disappearance, it was a vanishing act in plain sight. Chapter 4. Clues that don't add up. When investigators combed through the area where she was last seen, they expected to find something. Footprints. Tire marks. Discarded belongings. Anything that could anchor the timeline. Instead, what they found only deepened the confusion. There were indeed tire tracks near the roadside, but here's the catch. Too many. Different patterns, different directions. Some fresh, some older. It was like a tangled web with no starting point. And just when detectives thought they'd narrowed it down, a sudden rainstorm washed away whatever faint traces remained. Then came the personal items. A shoe. A hair clip. A torn piece of fabric. At first glance, they looked like promising leads. But when tested, none of them matched the victim. It was almost as if someone deliberately left behind random objects to muddy the waters. Even phone records betrayed expectations. Her cell stopped transmitting abruptly. No gradual fade. No last call. One moment it was active, the next it went dark. And then there was the strangest piece of all, a single message scrawled on a roadside sign, days after the disappearance. It read, "Still watching." No one ever claimed responsibility. Was it a cruel prank? A warning? Or the killer's taunt? One thing became clear, the evidence wasn't just missing. It was misleading. Chapter 5. Theories begin to spiral. When the clues stopped making sense, the theories began to multiply. For investigators, every strange detail seemed to open a new door, and for the public, those doors led straight into speculation. The first theory was the most straightforward, a kidnapping gone wrong. The remote location, the vanished car, the sudden end to cell activity, it all fit the profile. But if that was the case, why no ransom demand? Why no trace of a struggle? Others whispered about a serial offender. The area had seen disappearances before, though never so brazen. Some believed this was the work of someone who knew how to erase their tracks, a predator who thrived in the shadows. Then came the wilder theories. Cult involvement, government cover-ups. Even supernatural explanations began bubbling up in online forums. People pointed to the cryptic "still watching" message as proof of something bigger at play, something organized or otherworldly. And yet, through all the noise, one possibility remained the most haunting, that someone close to her was involved. A friend, a neighbor, maybe even someone she trusted completely. Those ideas rattled the community, because if true, it meant the danger wasn't lurking in the woods, it was sitting across the dinner table. Theories spiraled, but answers never came. And each one raised a chilling question. Were they chasing shadows, or circling closer to the truth? Chapter 6. The Media Storm. Once the story reached beyond the town limits, it took on a life of its own. What had been a tense local mystery became fodder for late-night speculation, talk radio hot takes, and relentless headline churn. Cameras showed up on porches. Reporters knocked on doors at dawn. The small department found itself thrust into an entirely different kind of pressure, one measured in clicks and viewer minutes rather than evidence. With national attention came two predictable things: amplification and distortion. Every rumor was replayed with the dramatic music of cable news. Every contradictory witness statement became a new angle to debate on air. Social media turned into an echo chamber. Snippets of interviews, shaky cell phone videos, and wild theories ricocheted across platforms, turning private grief into public spectacle. That spotlight helped in one way. Tips started to pour in. People who'd been silent for years suddenly remembered details. Anonymous callers claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles. A trucker from a neighboring state reported a strange encounter that might have been related. Those leads forced detectives to chase leads they otherwise wouldn't have seen. But the heat also burned. False leads multiplied. The family, already reeling, faced harassment and invasive questions. Witnesses recanted under pressure. And the police, who needed calm to methodically process evidence, found themselves on the defensive, explaining why they couldn't disclose everything. The media storm didn't just report the mystery, it reshaped it, complicating the hunt for truth, while keeping the town's fear alive on loop for an audience hungry for answers. Chapter 7. Witnesses Under Strain. When the mystery first broke, witnesses came forward with nervous courage, eager to help. But under the weight of endless interviews, police questioning, and the glare of media lights, many began to crack. Imagine being asked to relive the same night, over and over, until your own memory starts to blur. Did you really see what you thought you saw? Or had the story reshaped itself in your mind? Some witnesses swore they'd heard a scream echoing through the woods. Others insisted they'd spotted a shadow moving along the roadside at the exact same time. Yet when pressed, details shifted, times didn't line up, descriptions contradicted each other. The more people talked, the less the puzzle seemed to fit. And then came the intimidation. Some residents who spoke out suddenly found anonymous notes slipped under their doors. Stay quiet. You didn't see anything. Others were whispered about in grocery store aisles, accused of fabricating stories for attention. The stress was suffocating. For investigators, this made the case treacherous. Genuine witnesses were mixed in with liars, attention seekers, or those simply overwhelmed by fear. Sorting truth from distortion became an investigation of its own. By this point, what really happened that night wasn't just hidden in the dark. It was tangled in a web of human frailty, fractured memory, and the crushing weight of fear. Chapter 8. Theories Take Hold. As the case dragged on, with no clear answers, the silence created a dangerous vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed theories. Some were rational, born from frustration. Others bordered on the bizarre. But all of them had one thing in common. They spread like wildfire through the community and far beyond. One camp believed it was a botched robbery. Simple. Someone tried to take valuables, something went wrong, and the truth was buried. But skeptics asked, if that's true, why were personal belongings left untouched? Another group clung to the idea of a cover-up, that someone powerful had reason to keep this mystery buried. They pointed to missing files, lost pieces of evidence, and the eerie timing of official statements that seemed carefully worded rather than transparent. And then there were the darker theories. Whispers of cult activity. Stories of strange symbols carved into trees near the site. A chilling suggestion that this wasn't an isolated case, but part of something much larger. A pattern stretching across counties, maybe even decades. The internet supercharged it all. Online forums dissected every detail, arguing late into the night, each user convinced they were closer to the truth than investigators themselves. The problem? With so many theories swirling, reality began to drown under speculation. The line between fact and folklore blurred, and once blurred, it's nearly impossible to sharpen again. Chapter 9. The Media Storm. If there's one thing mysteries feed on, it's attention. And soon enough, this case wasn't just local chatter. It was a national obsession. News vans rolled into town, their satellite dishes rising above rooftops like metal sentinels. Reporters prowled sidewalks, knocking on doors, desperate for a fresh angle or a new soundbite. Headlines screamed with words like bizarre, unsolved, and chilling. Talk shows debated the case as if it were a crime drama series. Even late-night comedians slipped in references, turning tragedy into punchlines that made residents wince. For the small community at the heart of it all, the attention was suffocating. Neighbors whispered about strangers snooping near their fences. Shopkeepers spotted tourists buying souvenir newspaper clippings. Families of those involved begged for privacy, and instead found their photos splashed across tabloids. But with attention came pressure. Authorities, once steady and confident, suddenly seemed to fumble under the glare of national coverage. Every delay looked like incompetence. Every new detail was scrutinized, twisted, and magnified 1,000 times over. And yet, the media frenzy did something unexpected. It kept the case alive. Without the cameras, the microphones, the relentless headlines, maybe the world would have moved on. Instead, The story burned hotter, a fire no one could put out. Chapter 10: Whispers from the Shadows. As the official investigation stumbled, whispers began to grow louder. Not from the authorities, not from the press, but from the shadows, the places where rumors thrive, where half-truths and secrets mingle until it's impossible to tell fact from fiction. Some claimed to have seen figures wandering near the site late at night, their faces obscured, their movements unnatural. Others swore they'd overheard hushed conversations in diners, strangers trading details no outsider could possibly know. One woman told reporters she'd received an anonymous letter, written in shaky handwriting, warning her to stop asking questions before it's too late. The more the whispers spread, the more the story transformed. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was folklore in the making. Coffee shops buzzed with theories, children dared each other to walk past the site after dark, and social media erupted with amateur sleuths piecing together clues from thousands of miles away. But here's the chilling part. Many of those whispers circled back to the same conclusion. Someone out there knew more than they were saying. Someone might have been watching all along. The case was no longer just about what had happened. It was about what might still be happening in the shadows, where truth hides and fear takes root. Chapter 11: The Cold Case Files. When the dust finally settled, the case slipped into that chilling category investigators dread: a cold case. Boxes of evidence were sealed, photographs filed away, and reports archived under layers of bureaucracy. To outsiders, it seemed like the story had ended. But those who had followed it closely knew better. The silence wasn't closure, it was a haunting pause. Inside the evidence room, files told a story of missed chances and unanswered questions. Handwritten notes from officers hinted at leads that were never fully chased down. Witness testimonies contradicted each other, yet no one pressed harder to resolve the gaps. And the physical evidence? It was inconclusive at best, almost as if the truth had been carefully erased. For the investigators who had once poured their lives into solving it, the case became a phantom. It lingered in their minds, resurfacing in quiet moments like an itch that could never be scratched. Retired detectives admitted years later that they'd still lie awake, replaying scenes, wondering what they had overlooked. The cold case label didn't just mean unsolved. It meant unfinished. And unfinished stories, they have a way of finding their way back. Because as time passes, new voices emerge, new tools arrive, and sometimes, long after everyone has stopped watching, the shadows decide to speak again. Chapter 12: Whispers in the Dark. Even though the official files were closed, the story refused to die. Residents whispered about it in coffee shops, passed it down at family dinners, and warned newcomers never to forget. It became a local legend, the kind of tale parents reluctantly told their children to keep them cautious, or maybe, to keep the memory alive. Strangely, people swore the case left behind a presence. Some described hearing faint knocks on their windows at night, only to find nothing when they looked outside. Others reported shadowy figures lingering just beyond the glow of streetlights. Were these merely tricks of the imagination, stirred up by decades of fear? Or was something or someone still out there? The whispers weren't confined to ghost stories, either. Every so often, a new sighting would resurface. A figure resembling the victim spotted in another town. An unfamiliar car parked near the original scene of the crime. Cryptic letters appearing in mailboxes, signed only with a symbol that no one could explain. The community found itself caught between skepticism and fear. Dismissing the stories felt rational, but ignoring them seemed dangerous. After all, wasn't it safer to believe the warnings, no matter how strange they sounded? The line between folklore and reality blurred. And in that foggy middle ground, the mystery tightened its grip, refusing to let go. Chapter 13: The Forbidden Files. For years, the case remained a dusty entry in the archives, tucked away in the basement of the county courthouse. But then, a curious journalist stumbled across something that shouldn't have been there, a sealed envelope marked for internal use only. Inside were photographs, interview transcripts, and fragments of evidence that had never been made public. The files hinted at details darker than anyone expected. Witnesses had described hearing screams long before authorities said the crime could have taken place. A footprint, larger than any suspect's, was found in the mud near the scene, but mysteriously vanished from later reports. And then, the most disturbing detail of all, several pages were missing, torn clean out of the file as if someone wanted them erased forever. Why would evidence be hidden? Who had access to the case after it went cold? The journalist brought her findings to light, publishing them in a small but explosive article. Overnight, the town was consumed with speculation again. Some claimed it was proof of a cover-up. Others argued it was simply sloppy record-keeping. But one question loomed larger than all the rest. If crucial evidence was buried once, what else might be lying in the shadows? The forbidden files had cracked the mystery wide open again. And with them came a terrifying new possibility. Maybe someone never wanted the truth to be found. Chapter 14. Whispers in the Town. After the journalist's revelations, the town could no longer stay silent. Coffee shops buzzed with theories. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years suddenly shared fragments of memories, each piece sounding like another riddle. Everyone seemed to have a story, but none of them lined up perfectly. Some whispered that the victim had been seen arguing with a stranger days before the disappearance. Others claimed they'd spotted a black car circling the area late at night, its headlights cutting through the fog. And then there were the superstitions, talk of curses tied to the land itself, whispered warnings that no one had dared speak aloud until the files resurfaced. But fear spread just as fast as curiosity. Families who once joined search parties now locked their doors tighter. Teenagers dared each other to sneak near the crime scene, only to run back trembling, swearing they'd heard something moving in the dark. The whispers grew so loud that investigators, long retired from the case, began receiving phone calls urging them to look again. What was once considered a cold trail suddenly felt hot. It was as though the town itself was waking up from a long, uneasy sleep. And with that awakening came a chilling realization. Secrets don't stay buried forever. They rise, one rumor at a time, until the truth demands to be faced. Chapter 15. The Reopened Investigation. The whispers became too loud to ignore. Under mounting pressure from both the media and the town itself, authorities made the rare decision to reopen the case. For many, it felt like a second chance, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth had not slipped away with time. New detectives joined the effort, younger officers who weren't burdened by the old mistakes of the original investigation. They brought fresh eyes, advanced forensic tools, and most importantly, a determination to break through the fog that had haunted this town for years. Old evidence was dusted off and re-examined. Fibers, fingerprints, even fragments once dismissed as irrelevant were fed through modern databases. The smallest details suddenly carried weight. A misplaced shoe print, a torn piece of fabric, a witness statement forgotten in a box. Everything was back on the table. But the reopening of the case came with a darker cost, the return of fear. For those who had lived quietly for years, the idea that the suspect, or suspects, might still walk among them sent shivers down their spine. If someone had gotten away with this once, could they be watching now, blending in with the same community desperate for answers? The town wanted justice. The investigators wanted closure. But one question loomed in every conversation. What if the truth was more terrifying than the mystery itself? Chapter 16. Chilling New Leads. Almost immediately after the case was reopened, new leads began to surface. Some came from long-forgotten files, others from witnesses who, for years, had stayed silent. Suddenly, names that had once faded into obscurity were back on the lips of investigators. One lead in particular stood out, a neighbor who admitted, decades later, that they'd seen a figure near the scene the night of the disappearance. They never spoke up before out of fear of retaliation. Their testimony was vague, just a shadowy figure moving quickly, but it was enough to stir unease. Meanwhile, forensic experts revisited the physical evidence. DNA testing that didn't exist at the time was now possible. Items that had sat in storage for years were carefully re-examined. A partial fingerprint, once considered useless, now had the potential to link someone directly to the crime. But with every new discovery came a flood of unanswered questions. Why were certain files misplaced in the original investigation? Why did some witnesses suddenly change their stories after so many years? And most disturbing of all, why did those who seemed closest to the victim appear the most evasive when questioned again? The fresh leads breathed life back into the case, but they also painted a far darker picture. Perhaps this wasn't just a random tragedy. Perhaps it was something more sinister, rooted deep within the town's own walls. Chapter 17: The Suspect Nobody Expected. As the case unfolded again, whispers of suspicion began circling someone no one had ever suspected before. This wasn't the stranger from out of town, or the drifter people whispered about in the early days. No, this was someone far closer. Investigators found subtle inconsistencies in their statements, lies so small they almost seemed accidental. But when those lies were stacked together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Why had this person claimed they were asleep when a neighbor spotted them outside that night? Why did their story about the hours surrounding the disappearance change each time they told it? Even more unsettling, this suspect had access. They knew the victim. They knew the routines, the vulnerabilities, the very details that only someone close would notice. That realization sent a wave of unease through the community, because if the culprit wasn't a faceless stranger, but rather one of their own, then the sense of safety they clung to all these years had been a complete illusion. Journalists quickly caught wind, fueling speculation and fear. Neighbors looked at each other differently. Trust dissolved into paranoia. Who could you believe if the threat had always been standing right next to you? It was a revelation that shook the town, and investigators knew they were treading on dangerous ground. Because if they were right about this new suspect, the truth could finally be within reach, but so could deadly consequences. Chapter 18: The Evidence That Changed Everything. The break came not from a dramatic confession, but from something far more subtle, a small piece of overlooked evidence buried in the case files. A detective, reviewing the old boxes late one night, noticed a detail others had dismissed years earlier, a fingerprint smudge on an object nobody thought was important. Technology had advanced since the original investigation. What once was blurry and useless could now be enhanced, analyzed, and cross-checked with remarkable accuracy. And when the result came back, it pointed squarely at the person everyone was now beginning to whisper about. But here's where things became chilling. That same person had been part of the search party. They had stood in front of cameras, offering their sympathy, even shedding tears. They had helped pin up missing posters, all while, possibly, knowing exactly what had happened. The evidence wasn't enough for an arrest on its own, but it was enough to tighten the spotlight. Investigators quietly began tracking movements, digging into financial records, and interviewing people who had long stayed silent. And the deeper they dug, the more unsettling connections emerged. It was as though a mask was slowly slipping, revealing a version of this person the town had never dared to imagine. The question was no longer whether they were hiding something, but how long they could keep it hidden before the truth finally erupted. Chapter 19: Cracks in the Facade. When whispers begin, they spread faster than wildfire in a small town. Neighbors who once nodded politely now stared with suspicion. Friends became cautious. Conversations cut short when the suspect walked into the room. Even the air around them seemed heavier, as though everyone could feel that something wasn't right. For the first time, this once confident figure began to falter. Their stories about where they'd been and what they'd seen started to shift slightly each time they were asked. Small contradictions, the kind investigators live for, began to surface. And while they tried to brush them off, every slip was noted. Reporters caught wind of the unease, camping outside the suspect's home. Microphones ready to capture any word, any crack in composure. Cameras flashed as they left their house, trying to keep their head down, but the world could see it. Paranoia had taken hold. Behind closed doors, investigators leaned into the pressure, questioning not just the suspect but those closest to them. Old friends admitted things they'd once ignored. Strange behavior, unusual late-night trips, comments that, in hindsight, sounded darker than they'd realized. The facade that had held so firmly for so long was now crumbling piece by piece. And when a mask starts to crack, there's always the danger that what lies underneath is far more terrifying than anyone expected. Chapter 20. The walls close in. Every investigation reaches a breaking point, a moment when the patience of detectives transforms into action. For this case, that moment had arrived. After months of gathering fragments of evidence, the pieces finally began to fit together. Detectives obtained search warrants. Boxes of files, personal belongings, and hidden documents were pulled from the suspect's home. Each discovery felt like another nail in the coffin. A set of unexplained maps, odd receipts, and cryptic notes scribbled in margins. To outsiders, they might look like harmless clutter, but to investigators, they hinted at something deeper. The suspect, once so smug, was now visibly shaken. Cameras caught them darting into court buildings, avoiding questions, sweating under the spotlight they could no longer control. Their lawyers issued confident statements, but the cracks in their armor were clear. The public, once divided, began to lean toward guilt. Message boards lit up, news anchors speculated, and old acquaintances spoke out with unsettling stories. The weight of suspicion grew unbearable. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when investigators revealed they'd uncovered a hidden journal. Its contents, though never fully released to the public, were described as disturbing and haunting. To those who believed in the suspect's guilt, it was confirmation. To those who still doubted, it raised even darker questions. The walls weren't just closing in, they were about to collapse. Chapter 21. A twist no one saw coming. Just when it seemed the case was nearing its end, fate delivered a curveball that left everyone reeling. Investigators were preparing to press charges, confident they had their suspect cornered. But then new evidence surfaced, evidence that threatened to flip the entire narrative upside down. A small box, discovered in a storage unit miles away from the crime scene, contained items that didn't quite fit the timeline. Receipts, photos, and a single strand of hair. DNA that didn't match the prime suspect. For months, detectives had chased one theory, but now a ghostly presence seemed to lurk behind the scenes. Was there another player involved all along? The revelation sent shockwaves through the media. Reporters who had already begun writing final chapter headlines suddenly tore them up. Lawyers scrambled, defense teams demanded full disclosure, and online forums erupted with theories ranging from cover-ups to conspiracies. For the victim's family, the news was agonizing. Just when closure felt within reach, the case unraveled into a deeper mystery. Were they wrong to place their faith in the system? Had investigators overlooked the real monster, hiding in plain sight? The twist didn't just shift the case. It reopened every fear, every shadow, and every sleepless night. What they thought was the end was only the beginning of a far darker path. Chapter 22. Chaos and Doubt. The discovery of the new evidence didn't just shake the case. It shattered the foundation of trust between investigators, the media, and the public. For weeks, the story had been painted in black and white, a clear villain, a clear narrative. Now, everything was gray, and suspicion spread like wildfire. Police scrambled to re-examine their own work. Had they been too eager to close the case? Had they ignored warning signs that pointed to someone else? Internal memos leaked, revealing that not all detectives agreed on the prime suspect from the beginning. Some had raised concerns early on, but their voices were drowned out in the rush to deliver justice. Courtrooms became battlegrounds of speculation. Defense attorneys seized on the chaos, calling the investigation sloppy and biased. Prosecutors, red-faced and defensive, insisted the new DNA could be explained. Maybe contamination, maybe a red herring. But to the public, it felt like betrayal. The media, once united in their coverage, split into factions. Some clung to the original story, while others leaned into conspiracy theories. Was someone powerful pulling strings behind the scenes? Meanwhile, the victim's family was forced back into the spotlight, facing relentless reporters and the unbearable weight of uncertainty. Closure, once promised, now seemed further away than ever. The case, once so close to ending, was now more tangled than anyone dared imagine. Chapter 23. Theories Run Wild. With the investigation in turmoil, a strange new phase began. Theories spread faster than facts. Some were whispered in online forums, others shouted on talk shows. Suddenly, everyone had a suspect, a motive, a theory that explained what really happened. One camp believed the original suspect was innocent, a scapegoat caught in the crossfire of sloppy police work. Another insisted that the new DNA evidence belonged to a shadowy accomplice, someone who had always been involved but had slipped under the radar. And then there were the wilder theories, the ones that fed off fear and paranoia. Secret cults, government cover-ups, even whispers of organized crime silencing key witnesses. The police didn't help matters. Every time they denied one theory, two more seemed to pop up. Their silence on critical details, like where exactly the DNA was found or why it hadn't been tested earlier, only fueled speculation. Reporters chased leads that fizzled out in dead ends. Self-proclaimed experts dissected every frame of surveillance footage, claiming they saw hidden figures or impossible details. And the public, hungry for answers, latched onto whichever theory fit their fears or suspicions. In this storm of speculation, the truth became harder to recognize. With every passing day, the case felt less like an investigation and more like a puzzle no one wanted solved. Chapter 24. A shocking revelation. Just when it seemed like the case was drowning in noise, investigators dropped a bombshell that stunned everyone. Hidden within the mess of conflicting reports and speculation, they revealed a crucial detail. The DNA match wasn't random. It belonged to someone already connected to the case, a person who had slipped through the cracks for years. This revelation instantly reframed the investigation. How had this individual been overlooked? Why had their name never surfaced before? Suddenly, the questions weren't just about solving the crime. They were about exposing the failures that allowed the case to spiral into chaos in the first place. The press erupted. Headlines screamed betrayal, incompetence, and corruption. For the families of the victims, it was a gut punch. All those sleepless nights, all those unanswered questions, and now, a revelation that should have come years earlier. But the most shocking part wasn't just who the DNA pointed to, it was what it implied. This wasn't a lone figure on the fringes of the case. This was someone deeply tied to the investigation itself, someone who had been overlooked, perhaps even shielded. It was the twist no one saw coming. And for investigators, it was both a breakthrough and a nightmare. Because if this lead was real, then the case was far from over. In fact, it was about to get even darker. Chapter 25. The Case Today. Years later, the case remains open, lingering like a shadow that refuses to fade. Despite breakthroughs, revelations, and endless speculation, there's still no definitive closure. Files sit on dusty shelves, photos remain pinned to evidence boards, and investigators, some retired, some still active, admit this mystery keeps them up at night. For the families of the victims, time hasn't dulled the ache. Each anniversary brings new headlines, new theories, and a painful reminder that justice is still just out of reach. The shocking revelations in recent years raised hope, but with every false lead and every dead end, that hope flickers like a candle struggling against the wind. What makes this case so terrifying today isn't just the unanswered questions, it's the knowledge that someone out there, somewhere, may still hold the truth. Whether it's buried in sealed files, hidden in someone's memory, or locked away with a person who has never spoken, the answers remain elusive. And yet, investigators continue. New forensic technology, new DNA techniques, and fresh eyes on old evidence keep the case alive. Because the truth, no matter how dark, is still waiting to be found. So the story endures, a haunting reminder that sometimes the scariest mysteries aren't supernatural at all. They're human. And this one, after all these years, still terrifies those who dare to dig too deep.